The resignation letter sat on Professor Elena Marsh's desk for 3 days before she signed it. Her hand trembled as the pen touched paper, not because she doubted her decision, but because she knew exactly what it meant. 15 years of academic excellence destroyed. A tenured position at one of the country's most prestigious universities abandoned. Her reputation, carefully constructed over decades of scholarship, now reduced to whispers in faculty lounges and knowing glances in hallways she would never walk again. And for what? For a connection that could never be, for feelings that should never have existed, for a man she could never have. But here's what nobody tells you about the heart. It doesn't care about ethics committees or professional boundaries. It doesn't pause to consider consequences or calculate the cost of desire. And by the time Elena understood this truth, it was already too late. 6 months earlier, Elena had been untouchable. At 42, she was the youngest full professor in the philosophy department at Westfield University, a published author with 3 books on existentialism and the recipient of the university's Distinguished Teaching Award for the 4th consecutive year. Her seminars on contemporary moral philosophy were legendary, with waiting lists that stretched into the hundreds. Students spoke of her lectures with reverence, describing the way she could dissect Sartre and Camus with surgical precision while making 19th-century German philosophy feel relevant to their modern lives. Elena prided herself on her professionalism. She maintained clear boundaries with students, never socializing with them outside academic contexts, never connecting on social media until at least 2 years after graduation. She had seen too many colleagues compromise their integrity through inappropriate relationships, had witnessed the wreckage of careers destroyed by poor judgment and momentary weakness. She had sworn it would never be her. The fall semester began like any other. Elena walked into her advanced ethics seminar on the first day of September, her leather portfolio tucked under her arm, her dark hair pulled back in its customary bun, her expression neutral but welcoming. 23 graduate students sat in the seminar room, a mix of philosophy majors and interdisciplinary students. She recognized most of them from previous courses or departmental events, but there was one face she didn't know. He sat in the back row, slightly apart from the others, with a notebook already open and a pen poised above the blank page. Dark curly hair that looked perpetually disheveled, strong jaw shadowed with deliberate stubble, eyes so intensely green they seemed almost artificial. He wore a faded band t-shirt under a worn jacket, a small act of rebellion in a room full of students dressed in professional casual. He couldn't have been more than 25, maybe 26. Elena felt something shift in her chest, a small tremor she immediately suppressed. She had seen attractive students before. This meant nothing. "Welcome to Advanced Ethics," she began, her voice steady and authoritative. "This semester we'll be exploring the intersection of moral philosophy and practical application, examining how theoretical frameworks function or fail to function in real-world ethical dilemmas." As she spoke, she noticed the new student wasn't taking notes. Instead, he was watching her with an intensity that felt almost physical, as though he were reading something beneath her words, some subtext she hadn't intended to include. "Let's begin with introductions," Elena continued. "Tell us your name, your area of focus, and one ethical dilemma you've personally grappled with, something real, not hypothetical." The introductions proceeded clockwise. Most students offered safe, predictable responses. Whether to report a friend's cheating, how to balance personal values with family expectations. Then it was his turn. "James Callahan," he said, his voice lower and rougher than she'd expected. "I'm a second-year MFA student in creative writing, taking this as an elective. As for an ethical dilemma..." He paused, those green eyes fixed on her. "I once fell in love with someone I shouldn't have. Someone who was off limits for reasons that seemed ironclad. I had to decide whether to honor those boundaries or acknowledge that sometimes rules are meant to be broken. I still don't know if I made the right choice. The room fell silent. Several students shifted uncomfortably. Elena felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her expression neutral. "Interesting," she said coolly. "Though I'd argue that ethical boundaries exist precisely because our feelings can't always be trusted to guide us toward what's right. The fact that we want something doesn't make it permissible." James's mouth curved into a small, enigmatic smile. "I didn't say I acted on it, Professor Marsh. I said I didn't know if I made the right choice. Maybe the ethical failure was in denying what was real. Or maybe," Elena countered, "the ethical success was in recognizing that some desires, however powerful, must be subordinated to larger considerations. Integrity often requires sacrifice." "Does it?" James leaned forward slightly. "Or does it sometimes require the courage to acknowledge uncomfortable truths?" The other students were watching the exchange like spectators at a tennis match. Elena realized she needed to regain control. An intriguing question that we'll explore when we discuss Nietzsche. For now, let's continue with introductions. But as the class proceeded, she felt James's eyes on her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the air between them. Some challenge had been issued and accepted without either of them quite meaning to. The semester unfolded with deceptive normalcy. James proved to be a brilliant student, his papers combining philosophical rigor with a writer's gift for language. But it was in class discussions where he truly excelled. James had a way of asking questions that went straight to the heart of whatever they were discussing, questions that forced her to defend positions she'd held for years. "You're arguing that consequentialism fails because we can't predict all outcomes," James said during a discussion of utilitarianism. "But doesn't deontological ethics fail for the opposite reason? It refuses to consider outcomes at all, even when those outcomes might be catastrophic." "It doesn't refuse to consider outcomes," Elena replied. "It simply maintains that certain actions are inherently wrong, regardless of their results." "Maybe," James said quietly, "the real ethical challenge isn't in following rules or calculating outcomes. Maybe it's in having the courage to accept that some situations have no good answers, only difficult choices between competing values." Elena felt something catch in her throat. "That's a remarkably mature observation, Mr. Callahan." "I'm 27, Professor Marsh, not exactly a child." The way he said it felt deliberate. Elena broke eye contact first, turning back to the whiteboard. After class that day, as students filed out, James lingered. "Professor Marsh, I was hoping to discuss my final paper topic with you." Elena looked up, keeping her expression professionally neutral. "My office hours are Tuesday and Thursday afternoons." "I know," James said, "but I was hoping we could discuss it over coffee. Sometimes the best conversations happen outside institutional spaces." Every alarm bell in Elena's head went off. "I don't meet with students socially, Mr. Callahan. Office hours exist for a reason. I'm not asking for a date, Professor. I'm asking for a conversation about ideas." "Is there?" Elena's voice was sharper than she intended. "You're an intelligent man. I'm sure you understand why what you're suggesting is inappropriate." Something flickered in James's expression. "I apologize. I'll sign up for office hours." He left, and Eleanor stood alone, her heart racing, telling herself she'd done the right thing, wondering why the right thing felt so much like loss. But James didn't sign up for office hours. He continued to attend class, continued to participate brilliantly, but he never lingered afterward, never sought her out, maintained a careful professional distance that should have relieved her, but instead felt like an absence. Then, 3 weeks later, everything changed. Elena was walking across campus at dusk when she heard piano music drifting from the Performing Arts building. She shouldn't have followed it. but something about the music pulled at her. Through a practice room door left ajar, she saw James at an upright piano, his fingers moving across the keys with the precision of years of training. He was playing Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major, one of her favorites. James stopped abruptly and turned, seeing her in the doorway. "I'm sorry," Elena said quickly. "I heard the music and—" "You're not interrupting." James gestured to the bench beside him. "Please." Every rational part of Elena's brain screamed at her to leave. But before she could stop herself, she stepped into the room and sat down, careful to leave space between them. "I didn't know you played," she said. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Professor Marsh." "Elena," she said, then immediately regretted it. "Outside of class, there's no need for formality." "Elena," James repeated, and the way he said her name felt intimate. "I started playing when I was 6. My mother was a concert pianist. She died when I was 16. I haven't performed publicly since." "I'm sorry." "My father was a philosophy professor," Elena heard herself say. "He died during my 2nd year of graduate school. I became an academic partly to honor him, partly to prove I could do it on my own terms." James turned to look at her fully. "Can I tell you something?" Elena should have said no, should have stood up and left. Instead, she whispered, "Yes. Every time I walk into your classroom, I forget how to breathe for about 30 seconds. Not because you're beautiful, though you are, but because of the way you think, the way you take complex ideas and make them matter. I've never met anyone who challenged me the way you do, and I know that's inappropriate to say. I know all the reasons why this is impossible, but I've spent my entire life writing stories about other people's desires, and I'm tired of being a spectator in my own existence." Eleanor's pulse hammered. "James, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted. "I just needed you to know that you're not alone in this, whatever this is." "There is no this," Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. "There can't be. You're my student. I'm your professor. The power dynamic alone makes any kind of relationship unethical. I could lose my job. You could be expelled. Why is it wrong? Two adults, both capable of informed consent, both feeling something real. Where's the inherent immorality?" Eleanor stood abruptly. "Because I'm in a position of power over you, because I grade your work, write your recommendations, influence your academic future. Any relationship between us would be inherently coercive." James stood too. "Then I'll drop the class. Remove the power dynamic." "No, because everyone would know why you dropped. It would still damage both our reputations. And even if you weren't my student, I'm 15 years older than you. We're in different worlds. You didn't say you don't feel anything. You didn't say I'm wrong about the connection between us. You just listed obstacles." He was right, and they both knew it. "James," Elena said, letting herself look at him fully, "even if I wanted this, I wouldn't risk your future for it. You have too much potential. I care about you too much for that." The words hung in the air, an admission she hadn't meant to make. James reached out slowly and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was feather-light, but Elena felt it like electricity. "I should go," she whispered, but she didn't move. "Yes," James agreed, but he didn't step back. For a long moment, they stood there, balanced on the knife's edge between what was and what could never be. Then she stepped back, breaking the moment. "This conversation never happened. We're professor and student, nothing more. Do you understand?" James's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I understand." Eleanor walked out, made it to her car before the tears came, mourning something that never existed and never could. The next few weeks were torture. James maintained perfect professional distance in class, but Elena felt his presence like a physical thing. Every time he spoke, she heard the subtext. Every time their eyes met, she felt the weight of everything unsaid. Then November came, and with it, the university's annual ethics symposium. Eleanor was giving the keynote on professional ethics in academia. Professional ethics are fundamentally about managing power, she said to the packed lecture hall. In academic settings, professors hold institutional power over students. This power creates inherent vulnerability, and with that comes responsibility. As she spoke, she found James in the audience, his expression unreadable. But what happens when those boundaries conflict with other values we hold dear? What happens when rigid rule-following creates its own form of harm? Is there a point where our fear of impropriety becomes its own form of failing? After her talk, Elena found a note slid under her office door. Your talk was brilliant and devastating. The coffee shop on Morrison Street. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. If you come, no pressure. Just a conversation. If you don't, I'll understand, and I'll never ask again. J. Elena barely slept that night. The next day at 2:55, she found herself standing outside the coffee shop, her heart pounding. James was at a corner table, 2 cups of coffee waiting. When he saw her, his face transformed. You came, he said. I shouldn't have. Eleanor sat down. This is a terrible idea. Probably. But I've been thinking about your talk, about not letting fear dictate every choice. I think we owe each other honesty. All right, honesty, you start. James took a breath. I'm in love with you, not infatuated, in love. You challenge me intellectually in ways no one ever has. You make me want to be better. I know this puts you in an impossible position, but I needed you to know that this isn't casual. This is the real thing. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. James, your turn. Honesty. Eleanor stared into her coffee. I'm terrified. I'm 42 years old. I've built my entire life around my career. I've never done anything reckless. And then you walked into my classroom and upended everything. She looked up. I do feel something for you. Something that scares me because it feels too big. But I'm also your professor. Even sitting here feels like a betrayal. Then let me withdraw from the class. Remove the power dynamic entirely. And what then? Elena's voice rose. We date secretly. James, I have enemies in the department who would love a reason to bring me down. One whisper, one rumor, and my career is over. So that's it? We just accept that institutional policies matter more than what's real between us? They're not arbitrary. They exist because power differentials create real potential for harm, because professors have abused their positions in devastating ways. But that's exactly the problem. Elena stood abruptly. You think you know what you're choosing, but you can't fully understand the consequences because you're not the one with everything to lose. If this goes wrong, you transfer schools, move on. Me? I lose my career, my reputation, my identity. Everything I've built for 15 years, gone. James stood too, wounded. Is that really what you think this is? A statistical probability destined to fail? I don't know what this is, and that terrifies me. I've spent my life understanding things, analyzing them, but this defies analysis, and I can't risk everything on something I don't understand. Finally, James spoke, devastated. Then I guess we have our answer. Not every love can be lived. He turned to leave, but Elena caught his arm. Wait, I need time. Time to think, to figure out if there's any way to do this that doesn't destroy both our lives. Give me until the end of the semester. Can you do that? James covered her hand with his own. I'll wait, but Elena, time won't change how I feel. It'll only make it harder. I know, she whispered. The rest of November and December were controlled agony. Elena researched university policy, looking for precedents. She found nothing reassuring. Every example ended in firings or careers irreparably damaged. In class, she and James maintained professional distance, but other students began noticing something, commenting on the intensity of their debates. Then 2 weeks before finals, her department chair knocked on her door. "Elena, I've received a concerning report. A complaint about inappropriate relationships in your seminar between you and James Callahan." Elena's stomach dropped. "That's absurd. My interactions with all students are professional. Nevertheless, the university takes such complaints seriously. I'm obligated to launch a formal inquiry. I recommend you maintain extra vigilance regarding professional boundaries." After he left, Elena sat frozen. An inquiry. Even if they found nothing, the suspicion alone would taint her reputation. She emailed James, "Need to discuss your final paper. Office hours tomorrow at 2 p.m. He arrived on time. Elena left the door wide open. "Close the door," she said quietly. "What's happened?" "Someone filed a complaint about us. There's going to be an investigation." James paled. "Who?" "They wouldn't say, but this is exactly what I was afraid of. Even though nothing has happened, the mere perception is enough. This is my fault. No, this is about reality. We can't do this, James. We can never do this. Even if you graduate, this will follow us. Someone is watching. So we just give up? We accept reality. I'll finish grading your work. You'll get the A you deserve, and then we go our separate ways." James stood, hands clenched. "You're wrong, Elena. You're blaming yourself for feeling something real. You're letting fear dictate your entire life. You talk about ethics and integrity, but what's the integrity in denying what we both know is true? The integrity is in protecting both our futures." "You mean taking the safe path, the path where you never have to risk anything." James moved to the door. "I love you, Elena, but I won't wait around to be your secret shame. If you can't choose me, then I need to move on." He left, and Elena sat alone, feeling as though something vital had been carved out of her chest. The ethics committee investigated. They questioned her teaching methods, her interactions with students. Elena answered with meticulous honesty. No inappropriate contact, no meetings outside campus, nothing. They interviewed James separately. 2 weeks later, her chair called her back. The committee found no evidence of actual misconduct. "However, I strongly suggest you maintain clear boundaries going forward." Relief and hollow ache. She'd been cleared, her career was safe, and she'd lost James. Finals week came. Elena graded James's final paper last. It was titled "The Ethics of Self-Denial, When Moral Frameworks Serve Fear Rather Than Virtue." The final paragraph gutted her. Perhaps the greatest ethical failure is not in breaking rules, but in hiding behind them. When we use moral codes to avoid examining our own desires and fears, we transform ethics from a tool for human flourishing into a cage. Sometimes courage means acknowledging that we don't have all the answers, and that being fully human means accepting the risk inherent in genuine connection. She gave him an A+. It was the best paper she'd read in 15 years. James didn't attend the department's end-of-year reception. When she checked the registrar, she discovered he'd graduated early, finishing his MFA in 3 semesters instead of 4. He was gone. Christmas break was hollow. Elena went through the motions, made excuses about work stress. She threw herself into her manuscript, trying to exhaust herself into not thinking about green eyes and piano music. But late at night, she wondered, what if? What if she'd been braver? The answers always circled back. She would have lost everything. She'd made the right choice. So why did the right choice feel like dying? January brought a new semester. Elena taught with the same rigor, but something had shifted. She was more guarded now, more careful. She maintained extra distance. She was beyond reproach. She was also profoundly lonely. Then, in early February, she received an email from a former colleague with a link to a literary magazine. The story was by James Callahan. The title was The Professor. The story was fiction, with names and details changed, But the core was unmistakable: a philosophy professor, a graduate student, an impossible connection. But in his story, the professor chose differently. She acknowledged her feelings, resigned her position, and moved across the country to start over. The ending was ambiguous. She never knew if she'd made the right choice. Some nights she mourned the career she'd given up. But then she would look at him sleeping beside her, and she would think, "At least I chose something real. At least I didn't spend my life hiding from the one thing that made me feel alive. Right or wrong, it was hers, and that mattered." Below the story. This is dedicated to EM, who taught me that not every question has a good answer, and that sometimes the most ethical choice is accepting you don't know the right path, only the one you can live with. Elena read it 3 times. Then she sat at her desk, feeling something crack open inside her chest, something that had been sealed shut for months. She thought about 15 years of playing by every rule, of never risking anything that mattered. She thought about Harold Brennan's suspicious glares and the cage of other people's expectations. And she thought about James, about a connection that terrified her precisely because it was real. She opened her laptop and began searching. 20 minutes later, she found him. James had moved to Portland, was working at an independent bookstore while finishing a novel. Elena stared at his information for a long time. Then she opened a new email. "James, I read your story. It's beautiful and heartbreaking and completely unfair. You gave her a courage I didn't have, but maybe it's not too late. Maybe there's a version of this story where she gets a second chance to choose differently. If you're willing to talk, I'll be in Portland next weekend." No expectations, no promises, just a conversation. E. She sent it before she could overthink it. James's response came 3 hours later. "Morrison Coffee Shop, Saturday at 3 p.m. I'll be there." The week crawled. Eleanor arranged coverage for her classes, booked a flight. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Saturday afternoon found her standing outside a Portland coffee shop in the rain. Through the window, she could see James at a corner table, 2 cups of coffee waiting. Exactly like before. Except this time, Elena knew what she was choosing. She walked in. James looked up, and his expression transformed. Hope and fear and desperate want. "You came," he said. "I came," Elena confirmed. She sat down. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know if there's any way to make this work. I don't have answers or plans. But I'm tired of being safe. I'm tired of hiding behind ethics codes. I'm tired of making the responsible choice when it means denying everything that makes me feel human." She looked up. "I read your story. The professor in your version chose you." "It was fiction," James said quietly. "Wish fulfillment." "What if it could be real?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "What if I told you I'm seriously considering resignation, that I've been researching positions in other cities, looking for a way to start over somewhere no one knows us?" James's hands tightened. "Elena, I can't let you give up your career for me. I've spent 15 years building a career I'm proud of, but I've spent those same 15 years alone. I've hidden behind my work, used my ethics as a shield against any real emotional risk. And then you made me feel things I didn't think I was capable of feeling anymore." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm saying I don't know if we can make this work. I'm saying the power differential will always be part of our history, that people will judge, that we might fail. But I can't spend the rest of my life wondering what if. I choose you. However messy, however complicated, I choose you." James's eyes filled with tears. "You're sure?" "No," Elena admitted. "I'm terrified, but I'm sure that I love you, and I'm sure that I'd rather try and fail than never try at all." James stood and pulled her up, and then they were holding each other in the middle of a Portland coffee shop while rain hammered against the windows. Elena felt the rightness of being in his arms, felt the terrifying exhilaration of having finally chosen something for herself. "I love you," James whispered. "I love you too," she said. They spent the weekend planning. Elena would finish the academic year at Westfield, giving proper notice. She would apply for positions far from Boston. James would continue writing. They would take it slow, maintain privacy until Elena was separated from Westfield. It wasn't perfect. There were 1,000 ways it could go wrong, but it was a choice. Elena returned to Boston feeling both lighter and more frightened than ever. Monday morning, she walked into her department chair's office and submitted her resignation, effective at the end of the academic year. "May I ask why?" Harold's eyebrows rose. "Personal reasons. I've been at Westfield for 15 years. It's time for a change. This wouldn't have anything to do with Mr. Callahan. Mr. Callahan graduated in December. He's no longer affiliated with the university. My decision is completely independent." It was technically true. James wasn't the reason. He was the catalyst that had made her realize she wanted different things. Harold studied her, then nodded. "I'm sorry to lose you, Eleanor. I hope you find what you're looking for." "So do I," Eleanor said. The next 4 months were surreal. Elena taught her classes, knowing each might be her last. She worked harder than ever, determined to leave on her own terms. She finished her manuscript. She sorted through 15 years of accumulated possessions, and every night she video-called James, their relationship existing in a strange liminal space. They talked about everything, philosophy and literature, their pasts and hopes. They were building something real. In early May, Elena received a job offer from a small liberal arts college in Oregon, not far from Portland. It was a step down in prestige, with a heavier teaching load, lower salary, fewer resources. She accepted without hesitation. Her last day at Westfield came in mid-May. There was a reception, speeches about her contributions, well wishes. Several colleagues fished for information about why she was leaving. That evening, she stood alone in her empty office, looking at bare walls, vacant bookshelves, 15 years packed into boxes. A colleague, Professor Margaret Chen, appeared in the doorway. "You're really doing this." "I really am." Margaret closed the door. "Are you running away from something or running towards something?" Eleanor considered carefully. "Both. I'm leaving behind a version of myself I don't want to be anymore. Someone who hid behind rules and let fear dictate every choice. And I'm running toward possibility, toward a life that might not be as impressive on paper, but might actually make me happy." "Is there someone?" Elena hesitated, then nodded. "There is." "Does this someone make you happy?" "Terrified and happy and more alive than I've felt in years." Margaret smiled. "Then I think you're making the right choice. Sometimes you just have to leap." "That's what I'm doing," Elena said. "Leaping. Then I hope you fly." The next morning, Elena drove away from Boston without looking back. The drive to Oregon took 4 days. With each passing landscape, she felt herself changing, shedding the weight of other people's expectations, becoming someone more honest. She arrived in Portland on a warm June evening. James was waiting at her new apartment. They worked side by side late into the night, unpacking, turning an empty space into a home. Around midnight, exhausted, they collapsed onto her new couch. "Welcome to Oregon," James said, pulling her close. "Thank you for waiting. I would have waited forever." "You're brave now," James said. "That's what matters." Elena kissed him, their first real kiss after months of restraint. It was tender and careful and full of promise, not desperate, forbidden passion, but something steadier, more sustainable, something that might actually last. They spent the summer building their life together. Elena prepared for her new position. James worked on his novel. They hiked, attended poetry readings, cooked elaborate dinners, spent lazy Sunday mornings reading. They also had difficult conversations about their age difference, their history, whether they could truly escape the power dynamic that had defined their beginning. They argued sometimes. It wasn't always easy, but it was real. In August, Elena received an email that made her blood run cold. Westfield investigation reopened. Harold Brennan informed her they'd learned she might have been in a relationship with James prior to resignation. They were reopening the ethics investigation. Elena showed James. His expression darkened. How did they find out? Does it matter? So what do we do? Elena stared at the email. We tell the truth. That yes, there were feelings during the semester. That no, nothing happened until after you graduated and after I resigned. That we maintained every professional boundary. We document everything and let them make their judgment. Elena, that could destroy your reputation. Maybe, but lying will look worse. And I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being ashamed of loving you. If they want to investigate, fine. But they'll do it with complete transparency from me. Over the next week, Eleanor drafted a detailed response. She laid out the entire timeline, acknowledged the ethical complexities while maintaining that no policy had been violated. James had never been under her authority when they became romantically involved. She attached documentation, graduation dates, resignation dates, email records showing appropriate boundaries. The response came 3 weeks later. The committee found concerning judgment, but no evidence of policy violation. They would add a note to her file, but take no further action. Elena read it, then walked out onto her balcony where James was reading. "It's over," she said. "They found no violation." "How do you feel?" Elena considered. She'd been cleared, technically, but whispers would follow her. Some would always view her choices as unethical. "Free," she said finally. "I feel free." The investigation had forced her to stop hiding, to own her choices fully. Yes, she'd fallen in love with a student. Yes, she'd made decisions others might judge. But she'd maintained her integrity, had waited until there was no power dynamic, had given up her position rather than compromise her ethics. She'd done the best she could in an impossible situation. That would have to be enough. September came, and Elena began teaching at her new institution. It was different, smaller classes, more interaction, less pressure. She found she loved it. Without the pressure of maintaining a perfect reputation, she could focus on what had drawn her to teaching, helping students think clearly, question deeply. James's novel sold to a small press in November. Elena watched him sign the contract with tears in her eyes, so proud she could barely speak. They attended each other's events, they met each other's families. They made love, and made dinner, and made a life together. It wasn't perfect. Elena still sometimes woke questioning her choices, mourning the career she might have had. James still felt guilty about being the catalyst for her upheaval. But they talked through those fears. They worked on building something equal. Slowly, the identity of professor and student faded, replaced by simply Elena and James. 2 years passed. Elena received tenure at her new institution, published her book to positive reviews. James published a second novel, started teaching creative writing. They bought a small house with a garden, adopted a rescue dog, hosted dinner parties. They were happy. Not perfectly, but genuinely, deeply happy. Then one evening, Eleanor received an unexpected email from Sarah Chen, a former student from that advanced ethics seminar. "Professor Marsh, I owe you an apology. I was the student who filed the complaint about you and James Callahan. I was jealous of the intellectual attention he received, and I convinced myself my jealousy was ethical concern. I made assumptions that weren't fair and started an investigation that probably caused you enormous pain. I've regretted it ever since. You were an exceptional teacher and deserved better. I'm sorry." Eleanor felt anger initially at how casually Sarah had upended her life, but beneath it was understanding. Sarah had been a student navigating her own insecurities. Elena wrote back, "Sarah, thank you for your honesty. I won't pretend that investigation wasn't difficult, but I also understand you were acting on concerns that probably felt legitimate. Ethical questions are rarely simple. I hope you've continued to engage with philosophy. The fact that you had the courage to apologize speaks well of your character." She sent it, then told James. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Conflicted. Part of me wants to stay angry, but mostly I just feel tired of carrying it around. Sarah was young and made a mistake. I was in an ethically complicated situation and did the best I could. We're all just trying to navigate impossible situations without perfect information." "Do you regret it?" James asked quietly. "Everything you gave up?" Elena looked around their small house, at the books, at their dog asleep, at the life they'd built. Then she looked at James. "I regret that it had to be so hard," she said honestly. "I regret the pain it caused, the relationships damaged, the opportunities lost. But do I regret choosing you? Choosing this life? No, never. Even knowing how it all turned out, all the complications. Especially knowing how it turned out. Because now I know I'm capable of choosing something real over something safe. I'm capable of courage, even when terrified. And I'm capable of building a life that isn't perfect, but is authentically mine." James pulled her close. "I love you." "I love you too," Eleanor said, "and I'm choosing you every day. That's what matters." They stood there together as evening light slanted through the windows. Two people who'd found each other in the most complicated way possible, and somehow made it work. Not perfectly, not without cost, but with honesty, effort, and a love that had proved strong enough to survive ethics investigations, career upheavals, and the weight of judgment. Years later, when former students asked Elena about the most important lesson from her career, she would think carefully before answering. "I teach ethics," she would say. "I've spent my career analyzing moral frameworks, examining ethical dilemmas, trying to understand what makes an action right or wrong. But here's what experience has taught me. Sometimes the most ethical choice isn't the one that follows all the rules. Sometimes it's the one that requires you to look honestly at who you are, what you want, and what you're willing to live with. Sometimes it's the one that makes you most vulnerable." She would pause, choosing her next words carefully. "I don't recommend my path to anyone. The professional cost was real, and there are many situations where the power differential truly does make a relationship unethical and harmful. But what I can recommend is this. Don't hide behind ethical codes when you're really just hiding from yourself. Don't use rules as an excuse to avoid difficult questions, and don't let fear of judgment, of consequences, of the unknown be the primary driver of your choices. Because living a life where you never risk anything meaningful isn't living at all. It's just existing safely while life passes you by." It wasn't the answer her former colleagues at Westfield would have given. It wasn't tidy or comfortable or easily categorizable, but it was true, earned through hard experience and harder choices. And that night, going home to James and their small house and the life they'd built together despite all the obstacles, Elena would feel the rightness of it settle in her bones. Not perfect rightness, not uncomplicated rightness, but the deep, abiding rightness of knowing she'd been brave enough to choose something real, even when that choice terrified her. She had signed that resignation letter 3 years ago, her hand trembling, destroying 15 years of academic excellence for a connection that should never have been. But as she'd learned, sometimes destruction is necessary for creation. Sometimes you have to tear down the life you built to discover the life you actually want to live. Not every love can be lived easily, but some loves are worth fighting for anyway. And Elena Marsh, for all her philosophical training and ethical rigor, had learned that sometimes the heart knows truths that reason never could. She'd learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing what matters, despite the fear. She'd learned that integrity sometimes means acknowledging you don't have all the answers, only the willingness to face the consequences of your choices. Most importantly, she'd learned that she could survive her own decisions, even the ones that upended her entire world. And in surviving, she'd discovered something she never knew she was missing. A life that was messier, harder, and more complicated than anything she'd planned, but also more authentically hers. As the sun set over Portland and James called her name from the kitchen, asking what she wanted for dinner, Eleanor smiled. She'd made her choice, lived with its consequences, and come out the other side not unscathed, but whole. That, she thought, was perhaps the most anyone could ask for. Not perfection, not the absence of regret, not a life without complications, just the courage to choose, the strength to endure, and the wisdom to know that sometimes the most profound ethical choice is the one that makes you most fully human. And with that thought, Elena set aside her philosophical musings and went to join the man she loved in their small, imperfect, beautiful life together. Thanks for watching this incredible story. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. Here at Heartfelt Storytime, you have new, beautiful stories every day. Don't miss out. See you next time.